Hey, what's going on? I'm Matt O'Leary back with another video, and today I am doing a deep dive on Zach Wilson. But before we get started today, I just wanted to mention you can follow me on social media at Matt O'Leary NY on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that fun stuff. Also, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to the podcast. New episodes drop every single Monday. So we're taking a deep dive on Zach Wilson. Yes, we will be doing one on Justin Fields as well, but what I wanted to do today was talk to someone who has seen a ton of Zach Wilson play. So I talked to Jay Drew, who covers BYU sports out in Salt Lake City, Utah for Deseret News. And he had a lot of interesting stuff to say about Zach Wilson. So let's get into that. And then after, we're going to do some film breakdown, just a couple of plays. I'm not really a huge film guy, as you guys have known who follow the channel, but I do like to take a look at it from time to time. And I do have some things that I'd like to talk about. So here is our conversation, and let's get into it. All right, I'd like to welcome on Jay Drew, who covers BYU sports for Deseret News out in Salt Lake City, Utah. Jay, how's it going?
It's going great. Having some good weather out here, unlike what we hear about on the East Coast. So everything's going pretty well today.
Absolutely. Love to hear it. So why I wanted to talk to you, I want to get a little bit more information on Zach Wilson, who's someone who has really climbed up draft boards this year. And my first thing for you is, what do you think led to this junior year leap for Wilson?
Probably the number one thing is he was finally healthy, 100% healthy after a couple of really tough injuries he had to overcome. So I would say that was number one. Number two would just be another, basically his third year in the offense that he ran. And then, let's face it, the schedule wasn't quite as difficult as BYU had played in the past because of the pandemic. So all of those kind of were the perfect storm for him to move up the draft charts. But number one, I would say, was his health, just finally healthy. He could put the zip on the ball that we saw his freshman year, could make all the throws again. So that was probably the biggest thing.
Now, you mentioned his injury history. Is that something that concerns you when looking at him as a draft prospect coming out?
Not really, because it wasn't his knees. That after his freshman year, he actually went 18 for 18 in a bowl game. Basically threw a perfect game in a bowl game. And then the following January, they announced that he was having shoulder surgery. It wasn't for anything major. It was just like kind of a lingering pain that he had since high school. So he rehabbed that, missed spring ball before his sophomore year. And then going into his sophomore year, he basically, within a week or two of the opener, which was against Utah, they weren't sure he was going to be available. So he ended up playing, and he played that for about 4 or 5 games, and then he broke his thumb. He fractured his thumb. He was running down through an interception. He was running down the DB that had the pick. It made the pick, and he broke his thumb making the tackle. So he was out for almost the rest of the year. He came back with 2 or 3 games left. And so that leads us up to this coming year. He was able to participate. BYU actually got most of the spring camp in last year before the pandemic hit. So he was able to get that in. Then obviously the schedule changed. Instead of facing the likes of USC and Utah and Washington and some of the other, Missouri, some of the other, Power 5 teams on the schedule, they played whatever they could put together, really. And so, but he was 100% healthy, and you could tell he was throwing 60-yard passes and just on a rope. It was just amazing. And, it was obvious that he was 100%.
Right. And some of, Jets fans, and, this podcast covers the Jets. When they look at Zach Wilson, one of the things that maybe is a red flag is the level of competition, which is something that you hinted at, not the same schedule this year. Do you see that as a reason to be apprehensive looking at him as a draft prospect, or is that something you're not too worried about?
To be totally honest with you, yes. I think it's something that has to be considered. There's just no question about it. When BYU played tougher competition, his numbers weren't as good. He didn't get the protection that was needed. But then you could look on the flip side and say the talent around him hasn't been as good either, and he's still elevated, those guys. Because even though BYU has kind of the resources of in the stadium and of, the national following of a Power 5 school, they have a hard time getting Power 5 talent, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So you can look at it both ways. But yeah, I would say, having watched every game that Zach has played, there's been a noticeable talent disparity in the teams that they have played this season as opposed to past seasons. So for sure, you could look at it though and say, well, when he beat USC, he beat Tennessee his sophomore year, where he wasn't at 100%, as I have just described. So you could look at it both ways, but it is certainly something that needs to be considered.
Now, as someone who's watched all of Zach's games, as you said yourself, when watching him, what's some of his traits that makes you think that he can transition well to the next level that can carry over to the NFL?
Well, for one, he is an excellent athlete. And I've seen on, some reports that question whether he's a decent athlete. Here's a kid that could dunk a basketball when he was a sophomore in high school and was like 5'10".
Wow.
And he was also on his high school's track team. He's really fast. He's mobile. And then you couple that with arm talent, which is just, you can see that on film. The kid can throw the football. It's no question about it. But then the other intangible is Zach is just a gym rat, if you could translate that over to football. This is a kid that lives in the film room, who he has wanted to be a quarterback since he could walk. He has wanted to play in the NFL, and he puts in the work. If you've ever watched any of the games they've had on ESPN, they always talk about how he would drive like 10 hours to Southern California from Provo to work out with the same quarterback trainers that train like Drew Brees and Matthew Stafford and different guys. And so Zach he's just 100% dedicated. I've been in sports for 30 years, and I've never covered an athlete who was so driven to succeed as this kid.
Wow.
It's just from the film room, you talk to any of his teammates, they'll say, this kid doesn't have a life. He just goes from football practice to weightlifting, conditioning, and then studying film or seeking out anything he can do to, like a sponge, to learn more about the quarterbacking position. So that's just his work ethic, and his drive could never be questioned. So those are some of the stronger points that he has.
Right, absolutely. Now, something came out this week, I believe it's Rich Cimini, who covers the Jets for ESPN, was talking about that he wasn't selected as a captain. Is that something that you put much stock into, or is that something that was just overblown by trying to look for, just something to hold against this kid?
Yeah, with all apologies to whoever come up with that, that's just laughable. You got to understand what BYU is like. BYU has a lot of returned missionaries, guys that go on these 2-year missions for the Mormon Church. So most of Zach's teammates were older than him. Even guys that are freshmen and sophomores were the same age as Zach, who didn't go on an LDS church mission. And then, so these guys are out, all over the world, living on their own. They develop these phenomenal leadership qualities and skills. So when BYU picked captains, they're generally going to pick the guys who are a little older, have been on the mission, and the players, pick those guys. So then what happened was a couple of those guys got hurt, and they re-voted middle of the season, and they made Zach a captain then. So I think you have to. The bottom line is the teammates like him, they love him, they respect him. I haven't heard one negative thing from a teammate about him. So I think that's a combination of people just not understanding what BYU is like with these older players who are going to get the votes of their teammates. who are maybe more mature, have kind of been there, done that out in the world, so to speak. And so I don't think you can read anything into it. It's just they just happened to the guys that voted. Kalani Sitake, the coach, said, "Hey, it was a close vote, but we're going to go with the seniors." Zach, he's coming out early. He's a junior, so yeah. I don't put anything into it. There was another report a few months ago about how he was a spoiled rich kid,
right?
Where it's true that his uncle owns JetBlue or founded the airline JetBlue, and Zach's own father is fairly wealthy. He owns a string of like convenience stores and laundromats and things like that. But you talk to here's a kid that went out when he was out in California during the pandemic last May. He delivered DoorDash or Grubhub or one of those where you deliver food to people on Mother's Day just to earn money, so the burden wouldn't be on his parents, so he could pay for these trips to Southern California and things like that. So,
wow.
That's just a little anecdote, but when people say this is a spoiled rich kid, he drives the beat up old Mazda 6. I think it's about 8 years old around campus. His younger brother, who's also on the team, inherited the exact, literally had this Jeep that he drove in high school, and he gave his brother the Jeep, and he starts driving around kind of a beat up Mazda 6. So when people say, this is a spoiled rich kid, yes, he does have, he comes from a very, very wealthy family, but you would never know that. You just would never know that by talking to him and just watching him operate.
So would you say that it's fair that the Josh Rosen comparisons are a little off on the work ethic / spoiled kid who maybe doesn't fit in with the teammates?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Zach, he's just one of the guys. He doesn't put himself above any of the teammates. I was talking to him. I said, "What do you do? When you're driving to Southern California, what do you eat and stuff?" And he'd say, "Oh, I just stop at gas stations and buy gas station food." And then he stayed at the home of one of his teammates, a tight end named Isaac Rex, who's from Southern California, and he used to buy top ramen and like canned soup. And he used to show up at their house because he didn't want to be a burden on this kid's family. So he would buy just this really cheap food, a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of white bread, things like that. So, yeah, he's not an arrogant, silver spoon in the mouth type of kid whatsoever.
Absolutely. Transitioning to some more on the field stuff at this point. A question that often comes up from Jets fans specifically because of what we've seen the Sam Darnold go through is, how does Zach Wilson fare against the blitz / when he's pressured? And is he able to take hits well and get back up and stay relatively healthy in that capacity?
Yeah, Zach is really good at stepping up in the pocket.
Okay.
If you watch a lot of college quarterbacks, when the blitz comes, they'll run to their right. They'll just automatically sprint out to their right, if they're right-handed. Zach is really good. You can tell he's been trained by the best. He'll step up in the pocket. He can take a hit. He absorbs hits really well. Like I said, he does have the injury, but one of them was, his broken thumb when he was trying to make a tackle. The other was his shoulder from basically overuse in high school. So it wasn't from, taking hits. He doesn't like to slide, but this last year, if you watch film, he slides. He doesn't take on guys like everyone tries to compare him to Taysom Hill, who played for BYU, now plays for the Saints. First of all, he's a totally different build than Taysom Hill. He's not built like a fullback.
Right.
But he doesn't take on guys anymore. He might have done that. There's a clip out there where you see him trying to leap over, I think it was in the Utah game, his freshman year, and he takes a really good wallop. So he's learned that he's really smart kid. Watches a ton of film, and that was really noticeable this last in his junior year, where he knows how to avoid, and he has the mobility. That's the thing. I think I saw something where Roddy White, the former Atlanta Falcons receiver, was saying something about Zach isn't mobile enough to play in the NFL. I would beg to differ. He's like I said before, this kid's a great athlete, and he's been compared to Johnny Manziel a little bit. I would say athletic-wise, probably, but he's a much better decision maker, and that's kind of what stands out to me.
Gotcha. As for, let's just play the game for a second. Robert Saleh comes over to be the Jets head coach. He brings Mike LaFleur from San Francisco. If he being Zach Wilson was the pick at 2, how do you think he'd fit in with this San Francisco style of offense the Jets would be expected to run next year?
I think he'd do. I think that would fit him really well. Zach's actually said that he's watched several NFL offenses, and he said a couple that have stood out to him where he would flourish in was San Francisco's offense. He specifically pointed that out. So I think he could run that well. I think he could he's going to pick up the playbook really quickly, whichever offense he's in. But I think some of those he's really creative with his passing. I'm not going to say he's Patrick Mahomes, but he's got some of those throws in his arsenal, those kind of different arm angle throws and things like that. So I think he'd be fine, and he's even said that that's kind of an offense that he's watched in the past and thought he could flourish in.
And when just looking at his game overall, what's something that, if you had to pinpoint, what's the thing that he has to improve on for going into the next level?
Yeah, I think every once in a while he'll try to make something out of nothing. He isn't the type of guy that likes to give up on a play, and sometimes the prudent thing to do is to take a sack. So he improved immensely this last year on his decision making, but I would say that that is an area that he could improve. There's a clip. BYU played in the Hawaii Bowl against Hawaii at the end of Zach's sophomore year, and there's a clip of him where he tries to score, and he literally tries to dive over 2 guys and get into the end zone, and he does one of those kind of helicopter flips, loses the ball, and basically that play pretty much cost BYU the ball game, and we didn't see any of that this last year. So that happened at the end of his sophomore year. So I would just say that is, he has a tendency maybe to try to make something out of nothing a little too much, and that worked at the college level against the competition, but those sort of plays are not going to fly in the NFL. So I would say that's something he probably needs to work on.
Last one I had for you. Obviously, playing at BYU would be a little bit different than playing in New York. Personality-wise, with how you know him, do you think that's something that he'd be able to handle if given the opportunity?
Yes, and that one does give me some pause. Zach likes to kind of joke around with the media. He likes to throw in a little barbs. We've all kind of come to know that that's his personality. And for instance, one with me personally, I was asking him about his Thanksgiving plans one day, and he said, "I don't know what mine are, but I know anybody that needs a place to go can go to your house." kind of thing.
Right.
So I don't know if that sort of give and take that Zach's accustomed to would play in New York in a really major market. I'm worried that, I don't want to say they'll eat him alive, but, obviously Zach hasn't been under the microscope. There's a good contingent of people that cover BYU, that follow BYU because it's kind of a national type school with the ownership of the Mormon church and Mormons being everywhere. But I don't think Zach is going to be ready, and, through no fault of his own, be made ready for the scrutiny that he's going to be under. I will say this: he does take criticism fairly well, and I'm not talking about just from outsiders, but from talking to his coaches who say, Zach's the sort of guy that will take that criticism and will build on it. And as far as taking it from the media, the outside, I think he can handle that. But obviously that's a whole different animal out there in New York City. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how he handles that and how he's portrayed. A lot of people like to make a big deal about the Mormon thing.
Right.
Like Zach isn't the type of guy that wears Mormonism on his sleeve. If you would look at Taysom Hill, a lot of people kind of, when they read his story, they know that's part of him. He served one of those LDS church missions that I spoke of before. Zach's not that way. He's more, I don't know if you use the term worldly, or although he is a Mormon, he doesn't go around making a big deal about that, or so he wouldn't be in the locker room proselytizing or anything like that.
Gotcha.
If kind of, I'm trying to, if I can explain this right, where he's not going to make an issue of that at all. If any of his teammates bring it up or have anything to do with that, it just he keeps it really personal and doesn't go around trying to share it or anything like that, if that makes sense.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think you gave us a lot of great insight on just trying to get, some more info on Zach Wilson here. We could only do so much as, far away, just watching the game and watching film, but I really appreciate all the inside info you're able to give us there on the kid.
Yeah, hopefully you got, I kind of painted the right picture for you. There's no question he soared up the draft board. At this time last year, even it wasn't even a given that he was going to leave early for the NFL, let alone be in the first round. That's how quickly he's just improved and just shot up the draft board. So inherent in that is some sort of risk. Was he a one-year wonder, or does he have that kind of staying power? That's certainly something I'm sure every NFL team is thinking about.
Would you feel comfortable taking him at 2 if it was up to you?
I would, only because this is just a kid that's just not going to ever rest. He's not going to rest on his laurels. He's just going to, you tell him what he needs to get better at, and he's going to do it. He just has that drive that's just out of this world. So, yeah, I would take him.
All right, you heard it here. That's Jay Drew from Deseret News out in Salt Lake City, Utah. Really appreciate the time. All right, so something I noticed about Zach Wilson's game is his ability to fit the ball into tight windows. Like, this is a couple of good examples of that right here. So let's take a look. Watch at the top of your screen. That's a good ball. It's better from this angle. We can get a better view from this angle, but I'm going to pause it right when he makes the throw. So the arm angle, and that's just something that intrigues me too, the arm angle. And it's kind of like, I'm just going to slide over to the left and just put a little zip on this ball and put it in a good spot. Like that's to me is intriguing, at least. All right, this next play is just right down the hatch, chimney, lob throw. We know he can put zip on the ball. This little lob throw put in a good spot, that excites me too. Little pump fake with the shoulder. How you doing? Drop it in the hatch. Going to set my team up inside the 5. And we can see a good view on the pump fake on this side. Man in motion. A ton of that in his offense. So a couple step pump fake shimmy. Okay, I'm just going to lob it up. Put the ball in a good spot for my receiver. Get my guy inside the 5. Something else I like is his ability to roll out and get outside the pocket. Some people say, he's not athletic enough. That's really bogus, and I think that this is a reason why he would fit in the LaFleur offense so well and shortening the field and making things a little bit easier on him. We'll see here an example of that. Play action, just going to roll out. And a tight window throw. That's not an easy throw. He puts this ball in a good spot because you have to lead him just enough so that the linebacker doesn't cut the route, and you can't throw it too high because then you're going to get your receiver killed by the man behind him. Really good ball. Good spot. Deep ball accuracy is another one for me, and this is just put in a great spot for his receiver. Is it a super arm-powered throw? No, but sometimes you just have to be able to put the ball in a good spot, and he does that. And that's something that I think Sam Darnold struggled with so far in his career, is his deep ball accuracy. I don't think you would see that from Zach Wilson. Over the shoulder, leads his receiver. Is it a dart? No. Is it put where only his receiver can make a play on the ball? Yes. And that's what you need at the next level. Now, in the interview, Jay hinted at Zach Wilson sometimes trying to make too much happen or trying to force a ball, and that's some of his issues. And I agree 100%. Watching his games, that's something that I picked up on as well. And here's an example of that. So I showed you some good. Here's the bad. Here's something that you would like to see avoided, and that is getting his wide receiver killed. So he tries to force this ball into a very tight window and gets his wide receiver absolutely drilled. And he's a little high on that throw too. Here, we can back it up a little bit for a second. Yeah, it's a little high. We'd like that to not have to be a thing, but ultimately, like, there's a lot on film to like about Zach Wilson. And yes, I think there's a reason why so many are talking about him as a potential top 5 pick or the second quarterback off the board. There's a lot to like about him. I'd like to thank Jay Drew for coming on with me and giving us really great information on Zach Wilson. That was a really fun interview to do. Appreciate you sticking around with me and watching this one. I know it's a little bit of a longer video, but hopefully it's worth your while. Make sure to subscribe if you are new for more Jets content, and I'll talk to you next time.